welcome to the Badass Breastfeeding Podcast. This is Diane, your lactation consultant.
And I'm Abby, the Badass Breastfeeder. And today's episode is brought to you by Amara Organic Foods. They make organic, non-GMO baby food powders without the repeated high heat processes of traditional baby food. And we will hear more from our sponsor later, but you can head to badassbreastfeedingpodcast.com and check out our sponsor page. Our sponsors make this podcast possible. So if you need anything, see if you can give any of them your business. And while you're there, you can scroll down and enter your email address, and we will send episodes straight to your inbox once a week or possibly twice a week for the foreseeable future. Mm-hmm. And Diane has our review of the week.
And it comes from a listener named Lisa. Hope she doesn't mind that I put her name out there. I don't think she minds because she signed it, Lisa. And she knew that this is going to be a review. So here she says, badass breakthrough. Wow, the challenges of breastfeeding come from all of the white noise around us, not the actual breastfeeding. My newborn was 3 weeks old when I started to seriously doubt my ability to feed my baby who had extreme gas and tummy issues after every single feed and between feeds. I was convinced I was doing everything wrong until I found Abby and Diane's voices. What a godsend. The episode on bed sharing changed everything. I went from a zombie who needed 3 naps during the day to survive to actually sleeping. My husband, who had been on the couch for a month because he operates heavy equipment and needs sleep to be safe, was finally back in our bed. We were all finally actually sleeping. The episode on normal newborn behavior was comforting. I send this one to all of my new mama friends with babies. So many people were trying to diagnose my baby with everything under the sun. Now I know he's just a normal newborn with gas. These women simplify everything and make breastfeeding a reachable goal. I recommend this podcast to so many women, including my amazing pediatrician. Make sure you find one of those. I was lucky enough to have a natural, unmedicated birth at a birthing center. I worked so hard to achieve my empowering birth. Then postpartum rocked me. All the advice I was getting to use sleep schedules, prolonged time between feedings, and cry it out tactics, it wasn't feeling natural at all. A word of advice, throw out those damn books. Listen to the words of wisdom coming from this podcast and let your body and your baby do what nature intended them to do. They do it so well when you don't mess with it. I even reached out to Diane recently after listening to a good portion of episodes. She has been super helpful answering my questions as they come up and validating my concerns about caretakers and pumping, etc. I will be forever grateful for this evidence-based platform and will continue to listen and spread the word. I look forward to sending in a badass picture of myself breastfeeding when I get the courage to do it.
Aww.
Thank you so much for that. And it's, as I was reading through this, I was kind of thinking about the episode we just did on colic and how in the beginning of that, we were talking about how we don't really prepare for breastfeeding necessarily, we get through the birth and we're like, okay, the rest of it, now I got through the birth, the rest of it's going to be fine. Mm-hmm. And that's challenges pop up. So, it's, I think that's everybody. And
that's just the way it is. Yeah. It's just,
but we feel so alone when it's happening, you know, and people really do want to throw all this advice at you. Oh, it must be gas. Oh, it must be what you're eating. Oh, the baby must not be getting enough. Oh, you're, doing this wrong. You're doing that wrong. And it's nobody really knows. So be quiet and let me figure out my baby on my own.
Just shut up. I know.
Shut up.
Just shut up. Stop talking and listen to Abby and Diane. That's what she said.
Right.
That's what she said.
So thank you so much for sending that in. And you can put your, do your reviews on iTunes for us. And that really, that really helps the podcast. It helps other people find the podcast. It helps a ton. You can send us an email, badassbreastfeedingpodcast@gmail.com. And, it can be really hard to go from listening to what other people are saying to trusting your own instinct, but it really does work and it helps. So thank you. You're doing amazing.
Seriously.
Yeah. And today we're going to talk about birth interventions. We were just, before we got on, we were talking about where did this come from? I know we did one in the past on birth intervention, a long time ago.
Long time ago.
But I think people have asked recently, or maybe at least one person has asked recently.
It was a long time ago. So
it was, yeah.
Probably most new listeners have not gone back through 200 plus episodes.
No.
I sure wouldn't.
No, I wouldn't either. But if you are, we love you.
I know. More power to you if you can deal with our voices for that long. That's really amazing.
So I find that when I mention to people that birth has a lot to do with breastfeeding, they're pretty surprised at that. They really are.
I could see that. Yeah. Cause I thought that I didn't think about any of this. And I thought it would all just kind of, birth, and then birth would be over, and then we would start the next thing. And, not that like pregnancy, birth, breastfeeding was all kind of like one thing. I never thought about it like that.
But it's so, once you learn a little bit about it and you realize like, oh, it's all connected, like then it doesn't seem so strange. But when I talk about it with people, then they're just like, oh, I didn't realize. Like, if you're like, look where the baby's living, and then they're going to show up on this world, on this planet. Like, how is that not going to, where they come from and how they come out of that space not impacting them in any way, shape, or form? Like, it has a huge impact on what goes on. And then if we add things to that mix, that really starts to like throw a monkey wrench into things. And we're not blaming anybody. So that is going to be my PSA for this episode. Like, I don't want anybody to come away from this saying, oh, they said an epidural was going to be harmful to my baby and I had one, so that must be the reason why my baby's effed up. No, that is not the case.
No, I had an epidural and my baby is not fucked up.
I had an epidural too.
I mean, I had one with one.
Yeah.
And they're both equally fucked up.
So, right. So, and I had I had a vaginal birth with an epidural for my first, induced vaginal birth with an epidural and all the meds. And with my second, with the twins, I had a C-section. Whereas obviously they're not cutting into you without any kind of medication. So, obviously I had a, medication with that. There is no way around this stuff sometimes. There really isn't. And there are definitely situations where this is life-saving and these things need to happen. But just knowing, okay, that epidural might cause my baby to be a little bit more sleepy. They might not breastfeed as well, can save you a breastfeeding relationship. Just knowing that information can be huge in the way you think about breastfeeding your baby. Because I've had people that took it personally that their baby was not breastfeeding well, or that they were super surprised at how sleepy their baby was. And it's like, this is the reaction of the medications. Nothing that we need to worry about. We just need to, try a little harder. Make sure we're stimulating a little bit more. Make sure that we're, getting the baby on a feed, maybe a little bit more support, maybe a little bit more monitoring. Not that you did anything wrong, but knowing that going into it is a really, really big part of it. It's important to have this information.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I was pausing for effect, and I didn't know if you had anything you wanted to say along with that. But,
yeah.
There's a lot.
I have so many things to say.
I know it. And honestly, like, I did my master's thesis on how epidurals impact the initiation of breastfeeding and breastfeeding initiation and duration. And that research was just fascinating to me. And I remember, I probably told this story before. I was in the middle of doing that thesis when I met with, and I was working at the hospital at the time, and I met with the person who was in charge of OB. She was a doctor that was in charge of OB on the floor. She's no longer there. So if anybody's trying to determine where it was that I was working, if you're from Rochester, she doesn't work there anymore. So I remember talking to her about it. I was like, oh yeah, I'm doing my master's thesis on how epidurals impact breastfeeding initiation and duration. And she was like, how would an epidural impact breastfeeding? I'm like, it affects a baby. She's like, I don't understand how that would even affect breastfeeding. Like she went out, like she must have said that 2 or 3 times to me. I just don't understand how that would be. And it's like,
yeah,
because people are still telling you, like, you still have medical professionals in the hospital telling you when you are in labor, the medication does not go to the baby.
Yeah,
it absolutely does.
But then if you need meds later, then you're going to kill your baby if you have
Right.
those meds later.
The way
makes no damn
right,
sense.
right, it doesn't. And the other thing that I would say, and when I used to teach not breastfeeding classes, when I used to teach childbirth classes, we used to talk a lot about this. And I would tell them, like, okay, you're pregnant, right? Like, you're pregnant. If you get a headache, what can you take when you're pregnant? And they're like, Tylenol. Right. Do they want you to take anything stronger than a Tylenol? No. Okay. But when you go into labor, they give you an opioid right directly into your blood, right directly into your system, an opioid. And they're like, oh,
yeah.
So like, how is that okay? Like, obviously it's fine because babies are born just fine, but how does that not impact them even a little bit? And that's the other thing. People don't really know what's in an epidural. And we're just like talking epidurals here because that's the most common birth intervention is an epidural. I think it's like 80 to 90% of people get it or something. So they're super, super common, but they're also kind of put out there that they're perfectly safe and that there is not going to be any issue. And the majority of the time they're not, but there is some things that happen when you get an epidural, when you choose to get one. It does go to the baby. And it is,
and it goes to you, and it goes to the baby, and
it crosses the placenta. Like it definitely goes to the baby.
Yeah, right, exactly. And to say that it affects the baby doesn't mean that you're doing something wrong. I mean, people choose this. People have the right to choose, how they want to birth their babies, and they should. And if you want an epidural, then please have an epidural. The thing is just to be aware. Is being aware and having the information that, like, okay, if I have an epidural, or when I had Jack, I had an epidural, I had Stadol, which is a narcotic.
I had NuBane.
Huh?
I had NuBane in an epidural.
Yeah, I had, and then Pitocin, and then all this. I mean, I was like higher than I've ever been, and I've been high in my life. I swear to God, many times. And I gave birth to him. First of all, I've told the story before. I didn't remember what we were doing. Like, I pushed him out. I looked at him and I was like, oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. It was 30 hours of, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just suffering. And please give me more meds. And that's how you get sometimes when you're giving birth and you have meds available to you. But then it's going to affect how you are interacting with your baby, how your baby feels, how you feel. It affects, obviously your muscles, your ability to stay awake and aware. And of course, this is going to affect breastfeeding. And so be aware, know that, have the information like, okay, this is what I'm getting into. And this is what I'm going to have to expect, that maybe baby's not going to latch really well at first. Maybe I'm going to feel like shit, because you might. And maybe, I'm not going to have this, elated birth feeling, that many people have after they have babies.
Right. I did not have that at all.
No,
not
I
at
had
all.
it the second time, because second time I had Exley at home, and there was no, even if I wanted the meds, they don't have it. And so I gave birth to him, and he came very quickly, and I was totally sober and alert. And, we started breastfeeding immediately. I was still in the water, and that was totally different. It was a completely different thing. They both went on to breastfeed for years and years and years. And actually, the first child, who started off all rocky, ended up breastfeeding for 6.5 years. And the second one for 5 years. And that is an extremely long time. Mm-hmm. And they were two very different birthing experience, and both very successful breastfeeding stories.
And so the bottom line is that it doesn't mean, if there is some intervention there that's happening, some birth intervention, you might have a rocky start. Absolutely.
Yeah, you might, because you might be separated from your baby. You might.
Right.
I'm sorry, you go ahead.
No, yeah, exactly. You might be separated from your baby. They might not be latching well because of the medications. You might not be feeling up to it because there's a zillion things that could be going on with it. But that doesn't mean they're not going to breastfeed. It just you might need a little extra support with the breastfeeding. That's all.
Yeah.
It might
and I remember that
as you want it to.
Yeah, I remember the nurse coming in, and I didn't know anything. This was my first, I know nothing. Mm-hmm. And we were all wrapped up, and she came in and she was like, do you want to do some skin to skin? And I said, no, I don't. I didn't feel like it. I just
Yeah.
didn't feel like I had just been in labor for 30 hours and had so many drugs. I didn't feel like doing anything. And, it's better to do it, but I didn't know that until later. And still, we got through it, But yeah, these are all, it affects, how you get started on so many levels and layers. From just the physical ability to be able to breastfeed for you and your baby, and the emotional.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, this stuff like counteracts with your hormones too.
Oh yeah.
And and it takes a little time. I had a mom recently. God, where did I see her? It doesn't matter where I saw her, but this is just very recent, like within the past week or so, that she told me that she was like begging for her epidural. Because you get to that point, right, where you're just like, oh my God, I gotta give me an epidural. I need to have it. And they didn't check her. And I've heard this story, like I've heard the same scenario happen. And she was at like 9 or 10 centimeters when they gave her the epidural because they didn't check her. And usually, so what happens when you're in labor is you reach this point called transition where you are just like, that is where you're going from 7 to 10 and their hormonal surges are insane. And you're like reaching this point where you're just like, I can't do this anymore. Give me every drug you can find and get this baby out of me. And when a parent gets like that, you're like, you're there. You're there. Like we know that you're ready to go. You're ready to push this baby out when you hit that point. And when she said, all right, I want medication right now, they were like, okay, gave her an epidural. She was already at 10 centimeters. So that epidural didn't kick in until after her baby was born.
Right.
And then she couldn't move. And she was so silly. Pissed that nobody checked her first. And that isn't her job.
No, it's not her job to be directing people to check. No, that's ridiculous.
And I've heard that was another, I have another one that comes to mind where it was the same situation where she was so close to pushing and already just about fully dilated when the epidural finally was placed. They didn't check her. And then she was like, the epidural set in and she couldn't push because it was so fresh. Because a lot of times if you've had that epidural for hours and hours and hours, it's wearing off by the time you're ready to push.
Yeah, totally.
But it was so fresh that she couldn't feel the pushing. So they needed to do a vacuum extracted delivery, which led to all these other problems. And it's like, that was a really, really difficult, they really had a hard time getting breastfeeding off the ground because of that.
Well, and that's what happens a lot of times with interventions too, is that interventions lead to more interventions.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're kind of starting, farther back from the start line. And then you have to do certain things to help breastfeeding get started, which I think we should talk about after our ad break.
Oh, shoot. Okay. I forgot we have a sponsor.
We'll be right back. Today's episode is brought to you by Amara Organic Foods. We've all heard baby food pouches and jars are overly processed, low in nutrition, and high in sugar. But fresh delivery options are so expensive. That's why we love Amara. They make organic, non-GMO baby food powders without the repeated high-heat processes of traditional baby foods. All you need to do is add water or your breast milk, mix, and voila. You have a freshly made puree with the tastes, textures, and most importantly, nutrients, like you just made it from scratch. My kiddos are not babies, but they can tell you that they are yummy treats with real flavors. These mixes are a very simple and fast way to prepare treats for your nurslings as they begin to start solid foods. Try favorites like sweet potato raspberry, kale veggie mash, or oats and berries. Check out their baby food super powders and plant-based yogurt melts at Amara Organic Foods. That's AMARA Organic Foods. And use code BADASS for 20% off your first order. And our sponsor and their promo code can be found in our show notes at badassbreastfeedingpodcast.com under this episode. And also at badassbreastfeedingpodcast.com, you'll find our breastfeeding resources, all of our other episodes, and information about scheduling your very own one-on-one online lactation consultation with Dianne, who can help you if you have had a difficult time getting started with breastfeeding.
Yeah, I can. All right. So were you about to say something else?
No, I just think but from my experience, there was because I was induced, and then I induced again because it didn't work. And then I couldn't take it anymore, but I didn't want the epidural. So I was asked for something else, and they gave me that Stadol. And then I started having hallucinations. And then I was like, just give me this epidural. So then I had that. And then, then that wore off. And then I need you have the Pitocin. So now the labor basically stops. And then you need Pitocin to start it again. And so by all of this, I had the baby, we're completely exhausted. The baby's exhausted. We're trying to breastfeed. I am just I still look at pictures. I have a picture of that moment, that first time I latched him on, in my face. I look like I've been hit by a truck. And
so bad.
I remember that feeling of just ugh, I just want to be dead.
Yep.
And and then they're like, well, your milk's not really coming in, so you should give a little bit of formula. And then they start in with that. And I was just like, okay. And then here you are down this, you're down this rabbit hole, this really, really, really common rabbit hole. And then you're trying to figure out how to breastfeed.
You're going to make lots of friends in that rabbit hole.
Yes, right. And how often do you see this?
My God, all the time. All the time. But when we don't know, and my biggest thing about it is the education piece for it. If you don't know, if you go into this, because I can't tell you how many times I've heard somebody say, oh yeah, my OB said, that there's no reason to not get the medication. You should get the medication. It's fine. It's not going to do anything. It's not bad. And that's fine. Nobody's saying to not do it. Nobody's telling you do not get a medication when you're in labor. If that's what you want your birth plan to be, there's nobody that's telling you that is not what you should be doing. That is not what this podcast is about right now. It is about being educated on what happens after, because there is, like any kind of medication you ever will take in your life, there's probably some kind of after that goes along with it. This is no different than that. I remember doing a talk to I think it was a bunch of residents one time, a long time ago, about, medications during labor. And I remember one resident looked at me, he goes, do you honestly tell people not to get medication when they're in labor? It's I tell people to be educated about it and make an informed decision. What's wrong with that? Everybody acts like we're insane for suggesting that making an informed decision is
that people get information.
There's nothing wrong with it.
No, this lady told me, my doctor told me that I had to get the epidural because I would be in too much pain to deliver the baby.
Oh yeah.
How's that how have people been giving birth? Whatever. Again, if you want the epidural, I ended up wanting the epidural, and so I got it. But to say that it's not possible, it's not possible. I was okay. Oh my God.
I mean, I'd have them say too, you better get one just in case they need to do a C-section, then you already have it. I've heard that too. Oh, okay, so let's medicate just in case. I mean,
yeah.
It really, and the way, and we know there's so much research about this. There is so much research on this that when you get the Pitocin, when you start with the Pitocin, you start with the medication, and sometimes this is way out of your control. So you these things start, and then the baby's in distress. The baby's, starts to desat. The baby starts to their oxygen level goes down, whatever. The baby's in distress. And it's this is because of the medication. That's what 90% of the time, that's what causes that. That's what the research shows us. This is not just me talking. This is what the research shows. I did a shit ton of research for my master's thesis on this. It is all that impacts how the baby gets out. And there is a lot to it. And we know that these medications get into your system, and it causes, like you said, it causes that escalate of birth interventions. We see that happen all the time. And I cannot stress enough how important a doula is in this arena with this stuff. Like, because in those situations where the mom is begging for an epidural, that doula can say, why don't we check and see how far along you are? Because they're in the right mind frame at that point in time. That's their job.
Right.
Doulas
unfortunately, you have. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I just get fired up with this stuff.
I know. Well, but and unfortunately in this situation, especially if you're delivering in a hospital, you have like two agendas, right? You have your agenda to stick to your birth plan, and then the hospital's agenda, which is to kind of make this happen as quickly as possible and to do what they're used to doing. And you have to advocate for yourself, except you're giving birth. You're busy.
So you need somebody right now.
Yeah, you're a little bit busy. And so you need somebody who's like not your partner, not your mother-in-law, somebody whose job this is, who knows how to do this, who's working for you to do that advocating. And that really makes a big difference. But like myself and Diane and many other people, most other people, you end up in a situation where you're not getting off to a great start. And so what do we do?
When you're not off to a great start?
Yeah. What do you do with people when you see they're coming and they didn't get off to a good start because of all these birth interventions?
Well, I always like to know exactly what happened for the most part, and I think some people probably are like irritated with me because they just want to come in and have me fix their problem. But I'm like, tell me what happened, tell me about birth, tell me what happened, what went on, because that does tell me a lot of things. That was it a long delivery? Was the baby not in a good position? Was there, what kind of medications were involved? Did you, were you induced, which led to this long induction, which led to, C-section? A lot of this stuff really does impact how babies feed, whether or not they're super sleepy. Because there is a huge difference. And I've seen a million babies, probably not a million, but thousands of babies over the last 15 years. And babies that have been born unmedicated versus babies that have been born from a medicated delivery, there's a huge difference there as far as how alert they are and how coordinated they are with their suck, because that epidural also can cause, I'm not going to say it does cause all the time, but one of the side effects can be coordination. And sometimes that suck is not as coordinated as it needs to be when they're first born. You see it all the time. It goes away, but it's very frustrating to a new parent who's trying to breastfeed a baby that's not coordinated enough to make their suck, swallow, breathe happen. So sometimes it's educating them afterwards. This is, okay, that tells me a lot of that stuff that happened during labor, that's going to impact how babies feed. And people are like, oh, I didn't realize that could happen. Yep, it absolutely can. It can absolutely happen. So lots of skin to skin really with those babies. So if you are pregnant right now and you're listening, lots of skin to skin in the hospital. If you have your baby in a hospital, if you have your baby at home, lots of skin to skin at home. If you have your baby in a birth center, I don't care where you had your baby, if it's under the bush or under the deck next door, whatever. Lots of skin to skin with your baby, because that helps them to kind of, come back around again. It really just helps them to regulate. It helps them soothe. It helps them calm. It just helps them coordinate. Lots of skin to skin with your baby. Expect that they're going to be a little bit tired. That's another thing that people are really surprised about, is how tired their baby is. Well, they just go to sleep at the breast. They just fall asleep. Yeah, they're medicated, and especially it's just a lot. It's a lot on a newborn. It really is. And we don't know what their dosage was, how much is impacting them, whatever, but we just see that they're definitely having, this impact of medicated delivery. They're a little bit more sleepy. They might not be as coordinated. They might not be feeding quite as well. If you ended up having a birth that had more intervention, like a forceps or a vacuum extracted delivery, or, something like that, that might impact how they feed as well. They might be in a little bit more pain. They might be a little bit more uncomfortable. We might have to work a little bit more with positioning. They might be able to get on, but it might hurt you because of their positioning, because they are, their muscles are a little bit more tight from however what the birth intervention had happened. All of this stuff is really, really common. What I what I never saw happening when I was working in a hospital setting, and even now when I talk to parents, nobody ever says, oh yeah, the nurse told me that might be a situation. Or nobody ever says that. Nobody ever says,
totally.
oh, the baby's, the other thing that happens, other thing that happens all the time is the fluid. So let's talk about fluid for a second. How much fluid that you receive when you're in labor. Lots of fluid. They're already giving you bags of IV fluids, when you get there. And then if you decide to have an epidural, then they give you more bags of IV fluid because they have to, because of blood pressure issues that are common with epidurals. So now, and then you're getting more fluid like throughout the labor and all that stuff. So now you've had a couple bags of fluid and your breast tissue starts to swell. Usually not the first 24 hours, but usually into that second 24 hours, second day. After the first 24 hours, you might see that your breast tissue, you might not even notice it, but your baby does, because now they're not latching well. And they'll tell you have flat nipples and you need a nipple shield. Happens every day, everywhere. Every day, everywhere this happens. Baby can't get on because you have flat nipples, so now it's your fault. And you need a nipple shield because that's the only way the baby's going to feed. So that is very frustrating, but that is fluid. That has to do with the fluid. And when parents come in to see me and they're like, their feet are swollen, they're, like you're very swollen and uncomfortable. And that has to do, you're full, like your milk is coming in and you're super full and uncomfortable. That is a lot of fluid that they have given you during labor that has a huge impact on how your baby breastfeeds and what's happening with your milk supply. Babies can't latch if the breast tissue is full of fluid. That is very difficult for them. They can't it's just very hard for them to latch in those kind of situations. Another little tidbit of info with this is Pitocin, which like everybody gets now. I feel like I rarely talk to anybody who didn't get Pitocin, honestly. Even if it's an unmedicated delivery, they usually give it to you anyway, because they want it to, like, just in case there's a hemorrhage. It's like a whole protocol thing that I'm not even going to get into that right now. But Pitocin is very, very common. Pitocin is also an antidiuretic, which means that it will work to hold that fluid in. So now you've had all this fluid and your body is reacting to all this fluid and your baby's not latching well because of all this fluid. But you also have Pitocin, which is going to cause your body to hold on to that fluid a little bit longer. So it is a really uncomfortable place. But if we know it going into it, we can deal with it a little bit better. But not one time ever does anybody ever say to a new parent, this is because of the fluid. So once your body is resolving of this fluid, this will be a lot easier for your baby.
Yeah. And then the resolving of the fluid is that they're going to lose that fluid. And so the baby born at, say, 8 pounds is going to lose more than a baby that didn't have a lot of fluids. And then it's like, well, then you don't have enough milk because your baby's losing weight. So then you need to start formula. And now we're down the rabbit hole again.
Right. Yeah, it's a very common thing. And that's why sometimes when we get these emails from people that say, I was really concerned because they told me my baby wasn't getting enough and I needed to give formula in the hospital, but I really just wanted to, let my body do what it needed to do. Like, kudos to you, because that's a scary thing. That's scary to have somebody say, we think your baby needs formula because your baby's losing too much weight and they're not getting enough to eat. And you're like, no, I'd like to give this a try. Like, let me, usually people are like, all right, give them whatever you need to give them.
Yeah,
Because
I mean,
it's
said that. I said, I don't want to give formula. And they were like, well, that's why he's crying. He's starving. I mean, then what are you supposed to do?
Right. And this is the other thing that happens with this too, is it's very impacting on a parent. It is very, very, it really impacts you.
It's totally traumatizing. This is totally traumatizing.
Yeah. People don't tend to appreciate that for what it really is. And, it can be really disturbing feeling to go through labor. Like you feel like you're completely out of control, right? When all these interventions start happening, you're just like, oh my God, you're like, what's happening? Especially if you are somebody who really had an idea of what their birth was going to be like. And we know sometimes it doesn't turn out the way we want it to be. And that's really hard. That's traumatizing and it's really hard. And then you're supposed to you try breastfeeding and it's not working the way you thought that was going to go either. It is very...
Every single plan that you had is now going in the shitter.
Mm-hmm.
It's so upsetting and it's so scary. It's really scary. I remember being so afraid all the time, like any quiet time being on my phone, like looking up like what was going on and like how do I breastfeed? How do I get past this? And then you're dealing with, postpartum mood stuff, and what a terrible time. That was such a terrible time after my first child. It was a terrible, terrible time. Yeah.
I remember seeing a mom. It was when I worked in the hospital, and I went into her room, and, she was just like, I can't even remember how it came up. If I even just said like, how are you? Whatever. I don't remember how it came up, but she looked at me. She's like, this did not go the way I wanted it to go. Or the way she either said, this didn't go the way I thought it was going to go, or it didn't go the way I wanted it to go. And she was disconnected for sure. Like you could tell just by the look on her face. She was upset. She was disconnected. She was in a lot of pain. And I can't remember if it was like a bad tear or an episiotomy, something. She was in a lot of pain. She couldn't sit well. So we got her in a position where, she could lay back a little bit, put some pillows under her knees, take a little pressure off of her bottom, and just kind of like talk to her a little. And I remember going back out to the nurse's station. Maybe the nurse asked how she did or something like that. And I told her, and she goes, what is she upset about? She has a healthy baby.
Oh God, shut up. I can't stand that.
I can't either. I can't stand it. Like we completely, once the baby pops out of a mom, we completely disregard that parent. Like we completely disregard them as somebody that has feelings. They don't matter anymore, right? They don't matter. Who cares? But I've had people say it to me all the time. Like our old office manager, somebody that I used to work with, was like, oh, I don't understand how parents can be upset. They have a healthy baby. Who cares how they were born? Who cares?
I know. The baby, first of all, I feel like the baby, we just went through whatever the baby's going to go through. And of course we have to deal with that. But like, we need to focus on the parent right now. Mm-hmm. They're the ones who are going to need to be caring for this new baby. They're the ones who are going to have to be healing. Like the baby's fine. We need to be focusing on the parents. And it's so much the opposite. We focus on this baby. That's just a baby that, of course, sometimes things go wrong, but you're going to know. We're checking on the baby, but we don't check on the mom at all.
You can't have a mom without a baby, and you can't have a baby without a mom. You can't. They're a team. It's a team effort here. We can't look at one without looking at the other. And I don't know why anybody wants to separate those two and say, oh, the baby's fine. Who cares about the mom? Who cares if she just went through a 3-day induction that ended up in, a major abdominal surgery? Who cares about that? Her baby's fine. Like, there's a lot of psychological trauma that goes on with this. Physical trauma and psychological trauma.
Totally.
And now you have a baby that's not breastfeeding, and now you're supposed to bond with this baby? Like, how does that work? Is there some kind of magic that we don't know about happening here? But there's such a disconnect, and we don't help those mothers at all. We're like, oh yeah, come back in 6 weeks. We'll make sure you're healed.
Yeah, right.
You can fill out
they're going to check on the baby every
at.
Few days, even though the baby is clearly fine. Yeah. I remember because I had an episiotomy. So I had stitches all inside my taint. And I'm sure there's a better word for that, but I
thought you were going to say, I'm sure there's a picture. I'm like, we don't
know.
No,
oh God, no. I know there's the perineum. But it was horrible. And I was so fucking traumatized after this birth. And I remember going into the bathroom. I was so scared to look because I was so afraid to look. But like you have to clean it and everything, And I'm like, I just was curious what it looked like. But I was so scared and so just, oh my God. Like this part of my body, this very personal part of my body, had now been cut with scissors and stitched up again. And so at one point, I finally looked, and I was just like, holy shit, that's an exit now. That is just an exit. That's done.
God.
That is roped off. There's police tape all around this thing. And and then I'd never been through that.
Right.
And then you're expected to get up and go pick up your baby and care for this brand new life that's totally dependent on you. Oh my God. What a kick in the face.
Right.
It is insane, the things that we go through, that we just are considered like normal.
Oh my God.
It's so wild.
I had a client one time tell me that she
time.
looked and was like, oh my God, I think there's an extra hole there now. Like she had no idea what was going on.
Totally.
And her nurse was like, stop looking. No, look at it. Like, because you just, and I know I did not look. I have no idea what it was like, what it looked like down there afterwards. But I know I had a pretty significant tear.
Yeah.
And I was terrified of an episiotomy. Terrified. And I remember telling my doctor, like, I want nothing to do with that. And he was like, well, if we have to. And I'm like, no, we're not doing it.
I never thought that would happen to me. And in the middle of it, in the middle of birth, when he said episiotomy, I was like cheering. I was like, yes, just cut a giant hole and get this thing out. I don't care. Just like remove the bottom part of my body. I don't care. Just get it out.
Yeah. There's
what a trip.
You're not supposed to be doing that anymore.
Oh yeah, I know. I don't. Yeah,
they're just not supposed to be doing that. That like ACOG banned it like early 2000s, I think, and they're not supposed to be doing it. And there is not a lot of research to show that it actually helps to get the baby out faster.
Right? Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the things that happen to you when you have a baby, it is just. I mean, at least they told you about the episiotomy. I've had some people tell me that they never even knew that it happened.
Oh my God, that's insane. Yeah. Oh, I don't. Well, I think he did tell me because it was after the guy came in, and I heard him say episiotomy to whoever was standing next to him, and I heard it, and I was like, oh my God, yay! And then I think they did say like, okay, we're going to make a small. They didn't say episiotomy to me because I guess they assumed I might not know what that means, but I knew what it meant when I heard it. And then they looked at me and said, we're going to make a small incision. And I said, I was like, yeah, do it. Cut, get the knife, get it. I mean, it sounds like something you don't want, obviously, but when you're in the middle of that, it's like whatever is going to bring us to the end of this. Oh,
you'll sign up for anything. Yeah. Which is why it's really important to know what the, what the after effects are.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Because you don't know what's going to happen because birth plans, you have to have a birth plan because you have to know what you want and you have to have that doula there helping, to advocate for that. But you also have to know what are all the possibilities so that, so you know what to expect when breastfeeding starts. This is like, okay, so I went through this, so I know that my baby might be extra tired now. So I know that we might need to put a little extra effort into, or just a little extra attention into getting this started. It might take a little longer for them to really get going. And let me get that lactation consultant that I set up while I was pregnant as well and let them know what happened so that you know what to expect. So that you're not just like wondering what the hell just happened like I did.
Right. It's crazy.
It's insane.
So if you're having trouble with breastfeeding after a difficult birth, it's not you. And you can overcome it, but you definitely need help. You need more support with this. And one of the research studies I remember coming across when I was doing my work on this said that like the hospital systems that offered more support to parents that were like doing baby friendly type behaviors and offering more support to parents and making sure the parents who were breastfeeding had the support they needed. Those babies did well. Those mothers and babies did very well. Regardless of what intervention was thrown at them. It really comes down to how much support you have, because that is really important. That is really, really important. So make sure that and that might be a little bit out of your control too, but there are a lot of ways, lactation support is really helpful afterwards, after you go home. So plan on like, okay, want to see somebody, getting some, support, some information. Just really having that is very, very important. Bottom line when it comes to intervention.
That's how I got through it.
Yeah.
As I actually ended up calling somebody. Otherwise, I wouldn't have made it, And with Exley too. I mean, I had a home birth, unmedicated, breastfeeding right away situation, and I still struggled.
Mm-hmm.
I still had to reach out and be like, "What's going on?"
Yeah, I see home birth patients. Yep.
Yeah,
it does. It happens.
You're gonna. Yeah, it's like
babies are not perfect.
Either way, you're gonna need probably some help.
Yep. Yeah. Well, so that's it.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.
See ya.